So what we want to talk about today is making our save button work. Okay, there's a change that we have to make to the database class and a change that we have to make to our object class in order to make that work. So the first thing that I guess we're going to do is look on the back side of this. And for me, it's comic book. For you, it would be something else. But what's that? The side that says comic book on the top. Okay, so what I want you to notice here is that I've taken away a bunch of stuff. You guys have all of this, and what you need to add to that is a method like this. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to write to a file. And let me just show you what I'm talking about here. So at the end of today, what we want to see is we have a file like this comic books and I just called it .cbf, just to show you that it doesn't have to be .txt. Okay, so I know that might be hard for you to see, but what we're seeing there is 4:3:3:2.99:5:2000, and then Captain America with information for the Captain America comic book. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's what we're trying to get to today, is that we're writing to a file. All right, in order to do that, we have to have well, there's other ways of doing it, but this is a nice clean way of doing it, where we are creating a method that's going to return a string that's going to give us basically each of our variables for this object separated by something that we're going to call a delimiter. Okay, so some character that we're going to use. It doesn't have to be a colon for you. If there's a character that, so for example, if you're saving something and it's got a $sign in it, well then you wouldn't want to use that $sign as your delimiter. Okay? If you have something that has a decimal point in it, and you don't want to use a period as your delimiter, because it'll think that that's a delimiter when we actually read from the file. Okay? So we want to use some character that is not, that we don't anticipate being used. Okay? Does anybody need more time with that? So for me, it's a little bit different than it is for you. Okay? So for me, I used title, issue, volume, cover price, and then my comic book has a date object, and that date object is defined in an inner class down here. Okay? And we've talked about this before. The inner class has a month and a year. So that's why in this method, right here, I'm doing date.month and date.year, because I have to access those individually. Okay? You probably don't have something like that. Yours is probably not as complex as having an inner class. Anybody need more time with that? Okay, I'll come back to that if we need to. But I want to look at what's going on in the database. Okay, so that's on the, what I'm calling the front. So basically what we want to do, and I've taken away some stuff from what you guys are looking at. So you guys have the GUI components hidden from you so that we can put all this on one page, basically. Does that make sense? So if we want to save, then we need our save button to work. So that's this save b.addActionListener. Okay, and most of you have probably done that already, but just in case, I want to make sure we, cover all our bases here. So we have to add action listener to the button so that it works. And then what that does is I hid the add, basically I hid the add method and the edit method. Down in the action perform method, we want to make sure that we add what should happen when the save button is clicked. So the action event is the save button. We're going to go to the save method. Okay. We did this last year with the Hangman project. Okay. We were able to save categories, and that was actually a little more complex than what we're doing today. But I'm going to show you a different thing today than I didn't show you last year. Okay. So in the save method, that's what you guys really probably care about, if you care about anything. In the save method, what we're going to do is we're going to use a print writer that I'm calling book writer, and it's just the easiest way that we can write to a file. Okay, easiest way that I've seen. There are harder ways. Okay, so this is something new for us. This is saying that we're going to use a JFileChooser object, and I'm just calling it FileChooser right here. Okay. The way that this works, and I think what I'll do is I'll actually run this so you guys get to see it. Okay, so here's our database when it starts out. If I add those comic books, I don't remember exactly what they were, but 299 and whatever there, and I'll add another one. Issue 1, Volume 3. Okay. All right. So what we have is we have two things in our list. Unfortunately, right now what's happening is every time I run this thing, it starts out with an empty list. So we want to be able to save those to a file. And the way that we're going to do that is by clicking Save, and that gives us this thing. Okay. This is called a JFileChooser. Okay. So what I can do is I can basically get to whatever file I want to get to. So I'm just going to save to my desktop, and I'm going to call this comics, and .txt is a safe text file extension. Okay, just to review file extensions real quick. You guys are familiar with like .doc or .docx, right? You're familiar with like .mp3. You're familiar with okay, JPEG, all those different kinds of file extensions. So .txt usually means that we're talking about a text file. Now, if you want, you could create a program that only opens certain types of files. Okay, so you can basically limit the extensions that it will open. Okay, but we're not going to really get into that. I'm just saying you can. Okay, so .txt would work. Really, anything would work. Okay, I could call this .mp3, and it'll still save it because of my programming as a text file. It's just that it'll trick the operating system into thinking that it's a song. Does that make sense? But then if you tried to open it with iTunes or whatever, it wouldn't have the right file contents, so it would think that it's a corrupt file. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So so let's just stay with something that makes sense here, and we'll save it as comics.txt. Okay, so what I've just done is really nothing as far as this is concerned. Okay, as far as this code is concerned, I haven't made a choice yet. Okay, so basically what we have is we have the choice on this dialog to either cancel or save or make a new folder, or, you know, those are basically the choices. If I cancel, I really don't want anything to happen. And if I hit save, then what I've done is I've approved the action of saving. Okay? And so this user choice, which is an int, gets the value that I click. Okay? And the nice thing is that we don't really care what that integer value is. It's probably 0 or 1, but we don't really care, because what we're going to do is we're going to compare it to, the user choice is compared to, and we're checking to see if it's equal to the approve option, okay, from the JFileChooser class. All right. Now, I know that you guys are kind of like frantically writing things down, but I want to ask you a question just to check for your understanding of this. What is this? I guess.
Your computer's just gonna start.
Thank you. What is that approve option? Does anyone know? Yeah. Yeah.
Is it that once you click it, then that gives it the right of way to go ahead and save the file?
Yeah, that's right. So I guess I'm more curious about, like, in terms of the programming that must be going on in the JFileChooser class. Does anybody know what's going on there? Is that a hand up or yeah?
A static variable.
Okay, it's a static variable. How do you know that it's a static variable? Okay, so that's actually not why it's a static variable, but what's that? Okay. So the reason that we know that this has to be a static variable is because it's referred to by the class and not by a instance of the class. In other words, if it were like file chooser, this name here, dot approve option, then we could say, then we might know that it could be either way. It could be static or it could be just a public variable. Okay, since I'm referring to it using the class name, it has to be a static variable. So static variables are those that are shared between classes. Okay, the fact that it's all caps makes us think that it's probably a final variable, which means that it's a constant. Okay, and what type of variable do you think it is? So when I say type, what do you guys think of? Int and string and boolean. Good. That's good. That's what you should be thinking of. What type is approve option? Yeah, Jimmy. Is it a boolean? What do you guys think? Yeah? Okay. I see one person shaking his head no. Chris, what do you think?
An int.
Yeah. Okay. So the reason that we know that this has to be an int is because it's being compared to see if it's equal to user choice, and that's an int. Does that make sense? Okay, so those things are, maybe not the most important things, but I like asking those questions. Just they're kind of like trivia questions. They hopefully refresh your memory about some things that we've talked about. Okay, so anyway, basically what we're doing here is we're saying, what did the user click? That's what user choice really is. Okay, either the cancel button or the save button. Check if they approved the action. Okay, and if they've approved the if they've approved the save action, then what we want to do is we want to make a file. Okay, and I'm calling that comic file, and we're going to get the selected file from the file chooser. Does that make sense? So basically what we're trying to do here is say, when I click save here, comics.txt is going to become a file, and it's going to have the directory in the desktop. You guys following that? Okay, so when I do that, now it's going to try to make a connection to that comic file so that it can print text to it. Does that make sense? We did this last year, but I just want to make sure that it makes sense to you that this is basically saying we're going to write something, we're going to write some print to something, right? And the thing we're going to do is we're going to write to a file, and the file that we're going to write to is this thing called comic file, which I just saved as comics.txt on the desktop. Is that making sense for everybody? Then this loop is going to go through the array, and remember what we just did in the array is we made the book called Thor, and then we made the book called Captain America. Okay, so book count should be 2, so that means that this loop is going to happen when I is 0 and I is 1. Okay, those happen to be the indices of Thor and Captain America respectively. And so this is going to say, take your book writer, which is the file writer basically, and print a line. And the line that I want you to print is the books at the current index dot to record string, which is the method that you guys copied down just a second ago on the back side of that paper. Okay? It's very important that when you use any kind of file writing or any kind of what's called a stream, that you close the stream once you are done. If you don't do that, you have a good chance of corrupting your files, okay? Because you're leaving it open for whatever else to happen. So we want to make sure we do that. And then this line of code, where we're creating a connection to a file, requires that we do a try-catch block, okay? So it requires that we say we have to try to do this stuff knowing that something could go wrong, knowing that some connection to the file could be bad, the file could be corrupted, whatever, there's some input-output exception that could occur. Does that make sense? Okay? And if that thing happens, we want to catch it and we want to respond to it right away. We want to basically tell the user with the message dialog there was an error writing to the file. Okay? And just to show you that that actually worked when I clicked save, here's comics.txt, and you can see right there, and if I preview it this way, maybe, I don't know which one is better to look at, but if I preview it, you can see that that information that I entered is now saved. Does that make sense? Anybody have a question about how we use file writer, or I'm sorry, print writer to write to a file? Okay, so tomorrow what we'll do is we'll talk about then reading that file back into the array so that when we start the program, it has the stuff that we've done already. Okay?